Welcome to Historic Stagville. My name is Khadijah. I'm the Assistant Site Manager here. Stagville is a site of what once was one of the largest plantations in North Carolina. We know that at this plantation's height, there were over 900 people enslaved here and over 30,000 acres of land. All of our interpretation here does focus on the history and experiences of enslaved people on this property. And we do honor those people by saying enslaved because we recognize their humanity, their traditions and cultures outside of being forced to labor on this land. So the area we're standing in is called Horton Grove. These are 4 original slave dwellings. They were built in 1850. These buildings are pretty unusual. They are 2-story, 4-room buildings. We know that there would have been at least 8 to 10 people, enslaved people, living in each room of these buildings. So at least 100 people staying between the 4 buildings that are still standing here today. We know these buildings were likely built due to disease. So Paul Cameron owned this plantation at the time these buildings were built, and we know that a lot of the enslaved population were getting sick. So diseases like yellow fever and malaria were going around, and maybe Paul Cameron wanted to, or maybe he read somewhere that if he took their floors off the ground and gave them better roofs so rain and insects and mice could not get in, they'll be healthier people. And that was to preserve his wealth, because he knew that if people were not laboring, then he was not making any money. These buildings were likely also built to show off the Cameron's family wealth. So we know that the labor system here was very diversified. The main crops on this plantation were corn, wheat, and rye, but the Camerons also profited off of skilled enslaved labor. So we know that there are blacksmiths here, rock masons, carpenters, all types of different skilled laborers here, coopers who were doing and producing goods for the Camerons to sell. So we know these buildings were all constructed by those enslaved laborers. All of the nails that are part of this building were constructed by enslaved blacksmiths. The wood and the stones were collected and shaped and molded by enslaved stonemasons and enslaved carpenters. And these bricks were molded by enslaved brick masons here. So this is our last original chimney that is standing. And if you look very closely, you can actually see fingerprints from people who were laboring here in these bricks. So you can see 4 knuckles there. You can see a fingerprint there and an indentation there and that one as well. And if you come over on this side of the chimney, you can see a footprint in those bricks from a small foot from an enslaved child who was laboring here on this plantation. We're standing in one room of this building, of this slave dwelling. We know that there are 4 rooms in this building, and there would have been at least one group of people or one family per room, at least about 8 people in each room. This would be a living space, a dining space for those people. All things would happen in this one room. So we know the people who were enslaved in these buildings were doing labor in the fields here. So they're never seeing these rooms during the day like we are now. They're working from dusk to dawn all day long, only seeing these rooms by the light of a fire in their fireplace. So there are fireplaces in every room, but we know those are mainly used for light and warmth. These people who were laboring here are cooking together as a community. So they're cooking in fire pits. Everyone between these 4 buildings are coming together and cooking. We know that their daily responsibilities consist of laboring, but they're also keeping small gardens. They're tending gardens for themselves to eat. They are given a ration of salted pork and cornmeal from the Camerons, but they're supplementing their meals with what they're able to grow. They're also trapping small animals like rabbits and things like that. We do know that a lot of culture is retained here. Of the 900 people who are enslaved here, majority of them were not from Africa. They were second or third or fourth generation American. They were African American, but they are maintaining a lot of those African traditions that are passed down through family here. And so we see that definitely through swept yards. They're sweeping their yards, keeping the grass away from their yards, and that is a West African tradition. And they're cooking foods with roots in Africa. They're growing foods with roots in Africa, like okra and sweet potato and watermelon. Now in a furnished room, so this is what a room would be furnished like. So there would be one bed in each room for adults to sleep in, or the older people, and there'd be multiple cots, corn husk mattresses like this one for children to sleep on. We know that children were forced to begin laboring around the age of 8 years old here on this plantation. So one thing we try to focus our interpretation around is also the theme of resistance. So we know that people are resisting slavery in many different ways. The main themes of resistance that often come about or that we think about are escape and poisoning and through violent resistance. But we know that those are not the ones that happen most often. We see that resistance through many different ways, and especially through labor here. So we know people are getting together and slowing down their labor. We have examples of that through papers written by the Camerons from a plantation that they owned in Alabama. There's a letter written by an overseer about a woman named Rosetta, an enslaved woman. She's a seamstress, and she slowed down her labor. She's sewing things very slowly. We also see that resistance through stealing away or taking time, or the little bit of time they can for themselves. We know about a man who will not stay in his cabin at night. Every night he sneaks out to take a little bit of time for himself. He sneaks into the woods, and the overseer sees that. So these people are resisting in many different ways.